I used to believe that the best way to prove I was a responsible leader was to be available all the time. At first, it felt flattering. Every few minutes someone would stop by my desk with a question, send me a message asking for approval, or wait outside a meeting room just to get a 30-second answer before moving forward. I told myself it meant people trusted me. If a customer had a complaint, they called me. If two departments disagreed, they wanted my opinion. If someone wasn't sure whether to offer a small discount or change a shipping date, they waited until I responded. By the end of most days, I was mentally exhausted, but there was also a strange satisfaction in feeling indispensable. I didn't notice that I had quietly trained everyone around me to depend on me for things they could have handled themselves. That illusion didn't fall apart because of a crisis. It happened because of a 5-day business trip I almost canceled. A family member had encouraged me to go. "You've postponed this long enough," they said. "The office will survive." I smiled politely, but inside I doubted it. The week before I left, I prepared detailed notes, answered questions in advance, and reminded everyone to contact me if they needed anything. I thought I was being organized. Looking back, I was really preparing to continue doing my job from somewhere else. The first morning away, my phone started vibrating before breakfast. One message asked whether an invoice should be adjusted over a tiny discrepancy. Another wanted confirmation before replying to a customer who had simply requested an updated delivery estimate. Someone asked whether they could reorder supplies that had already been reordered every month for years. None of these decisions were difficult. The problem was that nobody felt comfortable making them without hearing from me first. I spent half the morning answering messages instead of focusing on the meetings I had traveled there to attend. During lunch, I was still checking notifications. That evening, while everyone around me relaxed, I was approving spreadsheets on my phone. On the second day, a colleague called sounding frustrated. "We're waiting for your answer before we continue," they said. "It's only a small thing." I almost replied automatically, but something stopped me. I asked, "What do you think we should do?" There was a long silence. Finally they answered, "Honestly, I don't know. I don't want to make the wrong decision." That sentence stayed with me long after the call ended. It wasn't that they lacked experience. They simply had no idea where the invisible boundary was between decisions they were expected to make and decisions they were expected to avoid. Later that afternoon, I mentioned the situation to someone I met during the trip, a manager who had been leading teams for much longer than I had. We were talking casually over coffee when I admitted, almost jokingly, "Apparently my office can't survive without me." Instead of laughing, they asked a question that caught me off guard. When someone asks for your approval, are they really asking for your expertise, or are they asking for protection? I frowned because I wasn't sure what they meant. They explained that in many workplaces, people don't seek permission because they lack ideas. They seek permission because they fear being blamed if something goes wrong. If the boss approved it, the risk feels shared. If they decide alone, the risk feels personal. I had never thought about it that way before. I had always assumed hesitation came from inexperience. The possibility that I had unintentionally created an environment where people avoided responsibility because approval had become a form of insurance completely changed the way I saw the situation. That evening, instead of answering every question immediately, I started replying differently. "What options have you considered? Which choice fits our usual standard? If I weren't available today, what would you decide?" At first, people seemed uncomfortable. A few responded, "We're asking because we want your decision." But after another exchange or two, many of them answered their own questions. I realized something surprising. In several cases, they reached exactly the same conclusion I would have. They simply hadn't trusted themselves enough to act without hearing it from me first. When I returned to the office at the end of the week, I expected to find unfinished work piled everywhere. Instead, I found something stranger. Some projects had slowed down unnecessarily while waiting for approvals that never should have required my involvement. But other tasks had continued after people finally realized they had no practical choice except to make decisions themselves. During our weekly meeting, I asked everyone to describe the moments that had felt frustrating while I was away. At first, nobody wanted to speak honestly. Eventually, someone admitted, "Sometimes we don't know what we're actually allowed to decide." Another added, "Even when we think we know, we're afraid you'll come back and ask why we didn't wait." That wasn't easy to hear because I knew they weren't accusing me. They were describing a pattern all of us had built together over time. I had often encouraged initiative by saying things like, "Be proactive," but whenever a decision wasn't exactly how I would have handled it, I instinctively asked, "Why didn't you check with me first?" Without realizing it, I had been rewarding caution more consistently than initiative. Over the next few weeks, we didn't launch a complicated leadership program or bring in expensive consultants. We started with a simple exercise. We listed the most common decisions that interrupted everyone's day. Next to each one, we wrote 3 labels: decide independently, discuss first, or escalate immediately. The first day felt almost unsettling. I kept checking my phone, convinced I had missed something. Instead, I found short updates. Handled. Resolved. Will include details in next week's review. One evening I called the office, simply because I wanted to hear how things were going. The person who answered sounded cheerful, but slightly confused. "Everything's fine," they said. "Is there anything specific you wanted?" I laughed, because I suddenly realized they hadn't called me once that day. Years earlier, that might have hurt my ego. Instead, I felt an unexpected sense of relief. For the first time, I wasn't carrying the invisible weight of believing that every decision depended on me. When I came back, I asked whether anyone had encountered major problems while I was away. Someone smiled and said, "Not really. We had a disagreement about one issue, but we looked at the decision guide, compared it with previous cases, and solved it." It was such an ordinary answer that it almost sounded disappointing. Yet I remember walking back to my desk, feeling strangely emotional. Nothing dramatic had happened. Nobody had celebrated. There had been no speeches or breakthroughs. The office had simply continued doing its work. Looking around, I realized the place felt different. Conversations were more confident. People interrupted one another less often. I wasn't being asked to settle every tiny disagreement anymore. I have spent years trying to become a better problem solver, when what the team had actually needed was a clearer system that allowed ordinary problems to stay ordinary. I used to think leadership meant being the person everyone searched for whenever uncertainty appeared. Now, whenever I return from being away and discover that almost nobody noticed I was gone, I don't feel forgotten. I quietly recognize it as evidence of something we slowly built together over many ordinary days. One conversation, one uncomfortable mistake, and one clearer expectation at a time, until the work itself no longer depended on whether I happened to be standing in the room.